So, having said all of that, this document outlines the U.S. Navy's initial low altitude training. For them, they say this document applies when you're below 1,500 feet AGL and you are not near an airfield. And that's pretty good guidance tactically as well. If you're below 1,500 feet AGL in the battlefield, you should really be caging your mind to what we're about to talk about today and what is covered in this PDF document. Questions on 1,500 feet AGL and how that's kind of a good, convenient magic number because it's also the the pattern altitude near an airfield.
Question not directly related to that, but the CC does not have a radar altimeter, does it?
Boy, does it.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yep, and we're going to talk about how to do that.
Okay, good. That was my only concern. I was like, how are we going to AGL without that? But
yep, we're going to do it. All right, other questions on the magic 1,500 foot number or below?
Nope.
Someone has a phone from 1979. Okay, so we skip on down, and eventually you get to graphic. This graphic talks about a bucket, which is okay if the bucket mnemonic works for you. But essentially, what the critical thing that they talk about is one page before that, number 1, terrain clearance tasks. So this bucket is really kind of symbolizing how much stuff you can keep in the forefront of your mind, and when it gets too full, things start overflowing, and you start missing time thinking about it. So, not surprisingly, near the ground, the most important thing, and the thing that always needs to have mental attention devoted to it, regardless of anything else, are terrain clearance tasks. The ground is there, it's unforgiving, and there really isn't a lot of excuse for you colliding into it other than you were busy thinking about other things and forgot to look at the ground. So all of this is a bunch of words to say, make sure you're thinking about the ground so you don't run into it. Questions on the importance of not running into the ground? So all this stuff seems silly and stupid and easy, but like a lot of things in Phase 2, things creep up on you. And when you isolate them, it's like, yeah, well, of course, this doesn't take very much mental effort, and of course, I should be able to watch out for the ground and not collide. In the same way that when you're doing air-to-air navigation, of course I know what heading I'm on, and they've got an instrument to tell me if I forgot, so it's easy to figure out. But when all the tasks start piling up onto your plate, you'd be surprised how often these simple things go out the window. So for air to ground, the most important task to always have in the back of your mind is not crashing into the ground, or terrain clearance tasks. Okay, so that's easy. Then, it goes on and talks about mission tasks and critical tasks and other things and blah, blah, blah. So the takeaway here is if you start to get mentally overloaded for whatever reason, the phone's going off in the background, whatever it is, one of the first things humans naturally do is try to reduce that mental task load. And so what you will do, just because you're human, and you want to reduce your mental task load for terrain clearance tasks, is you will start to ascend to make terrain not a factor. For today, that's not a problem. For the tactical space, and especially in the real world in the tactical space, ascending from the ground means danger for you. Ascending from the ground means radars can see you. Ascending away from the ground means humans can see and hear you sooner. So, the interesting thing and kind of the bizarre coupling or dance that happens with air to ground is, although the ground is there and it's unforgiving and will kill you, it's also the thing that will keep you alive if you don't hit it. And so you want to get as close as possible without touching it. And therein lies the challenge with a lot of air-to-ground work, especially at low altitude. Questions on the initial concept of how the ground is there and it's your friend, but it will also kill you. Okay, so for most of the exercise today, it's about maintaining awareness of the ground and monitoring your own mental load. So if you skip down to page 1.5, it talks about essentially time division multitasking. You break up your your thought train in continuous time into blocks. Some blocks you're thinking about terrain clearance tasks. Some blocks you're thinking about critical tasks. Other blocks you're thinking about non-critical tasks. And as your mental load goes up, non-critical tasks get thrown out in favor of critical tasks and terrain clearance tasks. And if critical tasks start getting thrown out the window, it's a good sign that you are getting task saturated and need to start thinking about other things. Or thinking about things to do to resolve that problem. The most obvious of which is, well, I'm going to pull away from the ground. That's nice for today, but in the battlefield, that may mean death as well. So it's easy to get yourself in a situation where you have no options and you're going to die, is kind of the big thrust after following that train of thought. Questions on that?
If you find yourself in that position, are you just kind of, that's it? Or is there a strategy to
well, if you
getting
find
yourself back?
yourself in that position, with probability 1, the ground is going to kill you. So you can cross your fingers and hope that the enemy's not paying attention to their radar or whatever and come away from the ground. But you're in a bad situation. So that is kind of one of the topics for later on in air-to-ground thread 1, which is strike planning. If you got into that situation, you fucked up long before you got into the cockpit because you didn't plan the route properly. So, air-to-ground work, way more so than air-to-air work, right? Air-to-air work, you take off and you don't know what's going to happen, and you just kind of, I mean, whatever's there. Air-to-ground work is almost entirely in the planning. And that's really the takeaway there. The ground is there. The ground really doesn't move, right? The enemy is not going to go blasting the ground with dynamite and changing it considerably between the last time satellites collected imagery of the planet's surface and the time you took off to fly the mission. So the ground is there and it's not going to move. Threats that are on the ground, like SAMs, especially strategic SAMs, really aren't going to move very frequently. Even tactical SAMs and ground vehicles, while they may be on the move, they aren't going to move too far from where your intelligence estimate says they are before you fly. Which means, if you're a good planner, you should be able to plan everything down to a T and be bored while you're. So, if things got bad and you had to start reacting to things in the moment, that is a sign that you fucked up during planning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So again, the planning is not the topic of today or tomorrow for that matter. Today we're just getting used to being near the ground, and tomorrow we're taking a look at dropping munitions so we can make things go boom and all that other stuff. But really, that's not too difficult. I mean, bombs come off and follow physics, rockets come off and follow physics, so it's just learning how to throw a baseball, basically. The physics of how balls move through the air. After that, if you pull up the little sketch, kind of the last block that we talk about is strike route planning. And that's where a bulk of the work that you do on your own is going to be. How to employ rockets, okay, you do that a little bit. How to employ bombs, okay, you do that a little bit. How to employ guns, okay, you do that a little bit. But you don't have to get very much experience under your belt before you get it. Later on, we'll talk about loitering techniques and strafing and bombing maneuvers. Okay, well, that's just how you move around through the sky. You position yourself in the sky to stay on station, not burn up fuel, and get a good view of things, and blah blah blah. So all that stuff doesn't take very much time, but strike route planning takes a lot of time because there are a lot of different things to consider and therefore a lot of different things to learn about so you can build experience. And you can't even just do it academically. You have to go fly these things to learn the hard way about things that you may have missed on the map. For example, you fly a really great route or you plan a really great route and you neglected to identify the symbols on the charts that say that there are power lines. And so you go out and fly the thing, and all of a sudden, power lines are a major factor, or you crash into them and die. And so you learn, well, I better learn what those symbols are and figure out where the power lines are. Things like that. So we're not talking about it today, but it will become a factor, and that is the primary factor that's going to drive whether you got yourself wedged into that corner where the ground was there and unforgiving, so you had to think about that, but you couldn't get up very high because you got SAM radar warning receivers going off or other things going on, and you wonder, how did you get yourself into this position? Yeah, you were the one who got yourself into that position. It wasn't by accident, and it wasn't because the enemy outmaneuvered you. You just outmaneuvered yourself by not doing what you were supposed to do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other questions on kind of this bucket and this time division multiple access way of allocating tasks to your mental. Okay, so the next page, which is 1-6, really talks about this physiological considerations. Some of it affects you because you're a human. Some of it does not affect you because it is unique to being in the cockpit and you're not actually in the cockpit of a goes on further, talks about weather conditions and obstacles and bird strikes. So bird strikes are crudely modeled in this game, but for our purposes, we don't model them, so they're not. Page 1-8 talks about things that will be a factor. So the sun position will affect you. It doesn't really affect the AI that much to my knowledge, but it will affect humans if they're playing the game on the other side. And turbulence. So up till now, we haven't thought much about turbulence, but turbulence could be a factor when you're flying very low. Other things to think about, and this has become more of a factor with the 2.5.6 patch, is when you're flying low over water. If you rely 100% on your eyes, you can be fooled at what your altitude is or what your altitude rate of change is. So it goes back to relying on that radar altimeter. If you go on down, it talks about some math and isn't the math great and blah, blah, blah. All right. So questions on how a lot of this. I mean, let's rewind. Initially, we're going to be flying around, and we'll be flying around kind of up high, where up high is defined as more than 1,500 feet AGL. And isn't that neat, nice and easy? And we can look down and we can see hills and mountains and valleys, and we'll just kind of survey a course down below us. And you'll feel, I hope, that this is easy. This is boring. What am I doing, wasting my time? And then we'll break underneath that 1,500-foot AGL level, and we'll start to get close to the ground. We'll probably start at about 1,000 feet. It's still pretty easy, but ooh, man, we were climbing up kind of a ridge, and then the ridge kind of dropped away from us on the other side, and we dove into a valley, and then we wanted to kind of cut behind this little hill over here, so we were doing a level turn at 1,000 feet. But boy, that level turn was a little bit sloppy, and I kind of started slicing it towards the ground, and boy, that ground came up quickly. So you learn to not slice your turns, and you learn to actually execute level turns appropriately. And then there's an additional challenge because we're all going to be in trail formation. So you got to keep an eye on the guy in front of you, make sure that you don't lose sight of him in this turn. And then you start to feel uneasy because the mental load is going up. And so we're going to ratchet up that mental load as we get closer and closer to the ground. And you will feel as you get closer and closer to the ground, ooh, man, I won't have time to crack jokes on the radio anymore. And I really got to start focusing on my flying. We're just going to put you into that situation so you learn by experience that your mental load goes up the closer you are to the ground. As you might imagine, if we happen to get down to 100 feet off the deck, suddenly those trees that seemed cute down there look gigantic and you want to start dodging them, and now there's buildings or there's power lines or whatever there is down there. And you'll see your mental load climbs, and then you start missing radio calls coming in. Someone had to call you twice to get your attention. All that stuff, we're just putting you in the moment so you learn through experience. Questions on that initial part of the plan for today and why we're doing it?
I have a question that goes back to what we talked about just before that. You mentioned turbulence. I know that DCS models the turbulence between aircraft, but does it actually model any turbulence from, like, if there's a hot surface on the that we're flying over or something like that? Does it model any ground turbulence?
It does not model that, but you can type in a number in the weather field for turbulence.
That's just kind of global turbulence, all right?
True. But even with global turbulence, I mean, whether or not you noticed it up high, it really wasn't a factor. Down low, it becomes a factor because it starts knocking you around and changing your orientation. And that orientation change may be pointed toward the ground when you only have 300 feet of altitude. And, it's random because that's part of the definition of turbulence. And so you don't know when it's coming. You don't know how it's going to affect you. And that means you constantly have to be watching what's going on with your attitude and your vertical velocity indicator.
Actually, that's a question I had about the VSI in general. That's great. And, like, there's, like, the minute to live rule and all that stuff. But isn't the VSI always based on the altimeter change in altitude? So if, like, we're flying into a mountain, our AGL could be changing rapidly, even if our VSI.
Yep. Right. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. I mean, you're bringing up how the number of problems balloons quickly. So, so that's kind of the second part. I mean, we'll do all that stuff when you get down there, kind of feel your mental load climbing up. But then we'll start to do other things like, okay, well, let's make a decisive move here. We're gonna fly orthogonal to this ridge, and we're all gonna climb over the ridge and come down on the. So you climb up over the ridge, and then the guy in front of you disappears below your visibility because the ridge goes down. And so you naively, I guess, push the stick forward so you can see him. And pretty soon, wow, the ground comes up quickly, and you didn't know there was another ridge on the other side of that. Again, part of that goes back to planning, but part of that leads into maneuvers that you can do to not naively and stupidly come over the top of a ridge orthogonal to the ridge. And so we will lead into some introductory maneuvers on how to smartly come over the ridge, considering two big factors. Number one is basic navigation and your own visibility. How can you come over that ridge so you aren't surprised by a second ridge and you see it when you're already nose down into it and you might crash into it? Another is a tactical view where, okay, even if you planned it well and you knew there wasn't a second ridge there, it may be beneficial to do certain maneuvers as you come over the ridge to minimize your exposure to AAA or SAM fire, or to simply make your path unpredictable so the adversary cannot predict where to find you in 5 minutes. There's a lot more to say on that, but we'll just go into some of the initial basics to cue your mind into thinking beyond the naive way of flying straight until the ground becomes a factor, and then just pulling up so the ground isn't a factor anymore, and then pushing the nose back over so you aren't far away from the ground. Questions on that concept and the two phases or two reasons why we're going to do something beyond the naive navigation.
So just clarification, when you say predictability, you mean when we're cresting a ridge, we're just going to operate under the assumption that we might be spotted. So we want to make that information useless to the person because they'll not be able to see us again soon. But if they do see us now, we don't want to give them any hints.
Sure, like for the helicopters that were flying the Bin Laden raid, right? So they happened to fly. They were flying near the ground. They had to fly over ridges and whatever. And there were small little houses. And these people had cell phones. And people for real tweeted, "Hey, I saw a helicopter at my house with my geolocation," because it's Twitter, and it was flying northwest. You can imagine the adversary says, okay, well, this tweet was 2 minutes ago, and this guy heard a helicopter, and he says it was flying northwest. So if I'm going to launch interceptor jets, where would that helicopter be? If you're just naively flying a navigation course, then it's easy to figure out where you're going to be and where to intercept you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, there's tactical considerations there. We're not going to get too much into it. We're just going to talk about some basic techniques to not naively fly over the ridgetop and then just nose over and continue on with your navigation. Other questions about the two motivating ideas for not flying a naive navigation plan? Okay, so I mean, those are kind of the highlights of this document. You can read more about it, and I hope you do, or I hope you have. It goes into more detail about some stuff, but really the big broad strokes is what we're looking to experience today. And again, the point of pretty much everything we do in phase 2 is to build the experience, not to go over the ticky-tack academic nature of all this stuff. You can read all that in the PDFs and the documentation we produce for you, but phase 2, at least with us in the simulator, is about building your experience, answering questions as a consequence of building your experience, and putting you into the situation so you can learn from mistakes and build more experience. Questions on what we're doing today?
None.
Okay, so let's talk about the plan for today. So we'll take off, and there's going to be 4 of us, so we can fly as a 4-ship. So we'll take off in 2 ship groups, and then we'll rejoin into a 4-ship, and we'll fly into the range. And we'll regroup into a 4-ship in finger 4 formation. So we'll fly into the range. I'll be the flight lead. We'll fly into the range in finger 4 formation, and then we're in the range. We'll be probably up at altitude. We'll be, I don't know, maybe 10,000 feet or so, just to kind of get a survey of what's out there. We'll see, what's at our 11 o'clock, what's at our 2 o'clock, what's out there. There's a basin that's pretty uninteresting for low altitude flying. Here's a couple ridge lines, and this ridge line splits, and isn't that interesting? Maybe there's a saddle point over here, so that's a good thing to know. We're just surveying the ground as we get prepared to get down to the ground. Then we'll take a trail formation. And we'll take a trail formation with between 1 and 2 nautical mile separation. And when we take that trail formation, we'll also be descending to the ground. So we'll stop our descent at about 1,500 feet AGL. Get a feel for the ground and how it feels down at 1,500 feet AGL. We might take a preview of the course that we're going to fly from that altitude. And then we'll come back and fly that course at about 1,000 feet AGL. See how that feels, see how your mental load was a little bit higher than it was at 1,500 feet AGL. Then we'll come back and fly maybe the same course and maybe a slightly different course at 500 feet AGL. And feel how that was a considerable increase in mental load than the 1,500 to 1,000 foot step was. Once we talk about that and everyone's kind of comfortable with that, we'll stay in the 500 to 700 foot block, and we'll do some of this navigation where we pop up over ridges, and all we're really doing is playing follow the leader. But the initial exercises, the leader or at least the guy who's in front of you, will be fairly easy to see. The second part is the guy in front of you will pop up and then vanish below your field of view or vanish below the top of the hill. So you're behind him and you see the guy in front of him, and then he's behind the top of the hill. And is he still on that path? Did he break left or right? So you get to experience that. We'll do that a bit. Then we'll talk about how that looks from the outside. So you can review this in TAC view and see how it really looked from the outside. But what if you were a guy who was manning a AAA gun on the back of a truck on the other side of that ridge? What did that look like to you? Or what did it look like as a guy who is on a AAA truck on the front side of the ridge as the airplanes were approaching? So you begin to cage your mind to the combat tactical situation of how it looks to the adversary. And then we will talk about techniques on how to cross that ridge top without doing stupid things like naively crossing over the top of it orthogonally. We may do some valley work. So another option is, okay, the ridge top has a bunch of AAA or shoulder fired SAMs on it. Is there a way to travel not over the ridgetop, but along the side or maybe in a valley to hide from these people? So we'll start to consider the terrain and how the terrain can mask you from different adversary sensors or different adversary weapons. And then at that point, that's probably going to be enough for everything we have to do. We'll see how much time we've eaten through. Questions on that big overall plan?
None.
Okay, so let's see. Let's get our radio frequencies up. So the range radio frequency we'll eventually get to. That range radio frequency is 377.8. That is likely the frequency we will be talking on unless someone else is using the range, and then we'll switch to one of the intra-flight frequencies. But expect to be communicating on 377.8 once we're in the range, and that's where we'll be talking about all of what we are doing for our exercise today. Before that point, we will be on the Nellis Tower frequency, Nellis traffic frequency, which is 327.0. And then on the Victor radio, we'll be on 123.0, our CTAF frequency for the map. Questions on those radio frequencies? Okay, no one else is on the map right now, so you can use the CTAF frequency to talk amongst ourselves until we get into the range space. If someone else happens to log in, we'll kick over to a different frequency. Questions on the radio frequency plan for today? Okay, who would like to be the leader for the second two-ship group?
Did we lose Stall?
I don't know
No,
where
I'm
he
here.
went.
I can do it if you want Stall.
Yeah, no, I'm more of a passenger on the way to the ground.
All right, so who's going to take the
Twinkie.
Okay, Stall, who do you want to be with, me or Twink?
I guess I go with Twinkie. It's fine.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll be 1, OSU pick will be 2, Stall will be 4, and Twinkie will be 3. And we'll use call sign Striker. So Striker 1, Striker 1-1 is myself. Striker 1-4 is Stall. And Striker 1-2 is OSU pick. And Striker 1-3 is Twinkie. Questions on call signs? All right, so we'll hop into the jets. Come up on 327 and 123 for check-in.
Striker 1-2 up on 327.
Striker 1-4 and a Charlie. Check, check, check.
Striker 1-2 on intercom, 123.
Striker 1-4, have you loud and clear?
Ready to check on 123.
Have you loud and clear?
I take it you guys aren't hearing me on 123.
I'm hearing you. Or I guess if you're not hearing me, that might be my problem.
Well, I think I heard Osu, and then I heard you respond to Osu, but then I also went for a check and I didn't hear anything.
Yeah, the volume is coming through really, really quiet for some reason.
Radar check 123 decimals.
Have you loud and clear?
Radar check 327 decimals.
Loud and clear as well.
Yeah, have you, Sam, and have you. Radio check. Have you loud and clear. Perfect. Striker 1-3, radio check on 123 decimal 0. Have you loud and clear. Check on 327. Have you loud and clear. Alright, Striker 1 flight, I show the altimeter at 29 or decimal 8. That was decimal 8-4. 8-5. 8-5, thanks.
Quick question. Which ATIS is the where the server's getting close to restart?
I'll say. With it. And check and make sure your fuel's at 100%.
those of you who do not know about the radar altimeter, above the box that handles all the squawk codes, and below your horizontal situation indicator, you'll see 4 horizontal switches. The third one from the left is labeled radar altimeter or R altimeter. Flip the switch until it's in the topmost position on. It should put up some digital numbers in the lower right-hand corner of your attitude display indicator. Radar alt should read 40. Striker 1 flight, check in when you have radar altimeter. Striker 1-2.
Striker dash 4.
Once we have radar altimeter, but shows 0000.
A-firm should show 40 because we're on the ground. Alright, give your planes a final check over before we start the procedures to move. Alright, Striker 1 flight, check in when you're ready for move. Striker 1-2.
1-2 ready.
4 ready.
Alright, Striker 1 flight, make sure your mode 4 ident is on. That's the bottom leftmost switch. Top position is on.
That's under where it says mode 4, right?
A-firm. And make sure the master knob in the middle right side pattern is set to norm for normal. You should see the reply light blinking green. Alright, Striker 1 is going to start to taxi forward and get lined up to exit this parking area.
Pontiac 3-1, clear to taxi to runway 3. Path 2. Pontiac 6-1, clear to taxi to runway 3. Path 2.
Pontiac 5-1, request startup.
Pontiac 5-1, clear to taxi to runway 3. Path 2.
Alright, Striker 1 group, taxi out when you're...
Pontiac 3-1, or takeoff.
Pontiac 3-1, taxi to parking area. Pontiac 4-1, clear to taxi to runway 3, path 2.
Alright, Striker 1 flight, we're going to start. Now it's traffic, Striker 1 flight, 4 ships, C101 Charlie, Charlie's taxiing via taxiway Golf, Charlie Alpha for runway 03 left, departure to the north. Now let's
Real quick, is there a way to get rid of that main colon and static 1 bar that kind of got introduced with this patch, or no?
Is that the mode and code?
Okay, if you don't know what that is, it must be a me problem. No, it's just it's really obvious. It just says like main colon up on the top left, and then static 1 kind of in these text boxes that are floating above my canopy.
You're in VR.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that's a known bug for VR.
So mine went away. I don't know how. I had it and it's not there now. So maybe just wait.
That's my only option. Yeah, I think I got rid of it too once, and I don't know how.
Just start randomly pressing buttons. It'll eventually go away.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be the first thing that randomly goes away.
I mean, that is how I got the Tomcat started the first time.
Yeah.
Now it's traffic, Striker 1 flight, 4 ships, C101s entering taxiway Charlie from taxiway Golf. Taxiing to the... to 03 left here, make sure we're all...
Pontiac 6-1, unable to clear for takeoff. Pontiac 6-1, you are cleared for takeoff when ready. Climb 300 at QFE 27.90. Pontiac 6-1, clear to taxi to runway 3, path 2. Pontiac 5-1, unable to clear for takeoff.
Alright, give your plane another
Pontiac
once over, and when you're ready to go, give out your call sign.
300 at QFE 27.90.
Striker 1-2.
Pontiac 4-1, unable to clear for takeoff.
4.
Dallas traffic, Striker 1 flight. 4 ship C101's taking runway 03 left for takeoff. Position and hold while we get position. Alright, we're going to enter the runway here. We'll stagger for a 4 ship takeoff. We'll have a 3-second interval, 1, 2, and 3 and 4.
Pontiac 6-1, unable to clear for takeoff.
Alright, Striker 1 flight, say numbers when ready. We'll run them up to 80, and then we'll have a 3-second interval for takeoff. Check takeoff. Striker 1-2. 1-2.
4.
Alright, Striker 1 flight, check takeoff lights and takeoff position. Run them up to 80 with brakes on. Stand. 1-2. 1-3.
4.
1-0. 2's rolling. 3 rolling.
4 rolling.
Pontiac 6-1, unable to clear for takeoff. Pontiac 4-1, unable to clear for takeoff. Pontiac 6-1, unable to clear for takeoff. Pontiac 4-1, unable to clear for takeoff. Pontiac 6-1, unable to clear for takeoff. Pontiac 6-1, unable to clear for takeoff.
1-0.
Pontiac 4-1, unable to clear for takeoff.
Now this traffic, Striker 1 flight, 4 ship C101's taking off and airborne
Pontiac
runway 03
6-1,
left.
unable
Hard
to clear
depart.
for takeoff. Pontiac 4-1, you are cleared for takeoff when ready. Climb 300 at QFE 27.90.
the left, heading 270. Now it's traffic striker 1 flight 4 ship, C101's on departure from runway 03 left, turning left for heading 270 now it's traffic. Stepping up the power a bit here since we're rejoining. Okay, we're going to slow our descent here to when we get to 10,000, we'll stop. Alright, so someone traveling with us does not have their mode 4 or their mode 3, or they're not trans. Alright, so someone traveling with us does not have their mode 4 or their mode 3. Or they're not trans. Alright, so someone traveling with us does not have their mode 4 or their mode 3. Or they're not trans. Alright, so someone traveling with us does not have their mode 4 or their mode 3. Or they're not trans. Alright, so someone traveling with us does not have their mode 4 or their mode 3.
It might be 3. I had a green receive light earlier, but I don't have it now.
Alright, Striker 1 flight, we're going to turn right to heading 010. Now it's Traffic Striker 1 flight, 4 ships C101s turning north into the range. Last call, switching to range control 377.8. Striker 1 flight, switch 377.8. Pick up primary comms on 377.8. Check.
Switching in.
Switching in.
Striker 2's up on 3778.
Alright, Striker 1 flight, we all are on 377.8. We'll use this channel as our primary radio frequency. We're turning into the Sally corridor as marked by the ridge at our 2 o'clock. Striker 1 flight, we're going to continue our turn here to final bearing 0, or final heading 040. We're also climbing up here to avoid this range. We're going to fly along the range for a bit and take a look at what it looks like from above. One thing to note is the shadows cast by the ridge line in the mountains, because the sun is fairly low in the sky. Those shadows help you, your human eyes, determine what the elevation is and kind of how rough that terrain is. Be advised those shadows change as the sun moves around the planet. Alright, we're looking for a target speed in the 230 to 240 knots range. And we're rolling out on 040. At our 9 o'clock, we see some lower level ridge lines and a couple of mountains down in that base. Alright, so this major ridge line we're flying over really marks kind of the center of the Sally corridor. So when you're looking to enter the Sally corridor without any nav computer or radar contact or ATC guidance, this is what you're looking for visually. Gonna turn left to heading 010. Take a look at how the terrain below us looks. Use the shadows to kind of infer how bumpy it is, where the small little ridges are, the texture to the terrain. Coming up on kind of the highest peak, going to be directly underneath us in about 10 seconds. Alright, at our 12 o'clock, you'll see the ridge continues to bend further to the north and then northwest. That bend kind of marks the end of the Sally corridor as it moves northeast, and then the Sally corridor continues north with that ridge line marking the west end of the Sally corridor. So we're going to head up to that point now, leveled out on heading 010. We'll fly along this ridge line until that ridge line bends more to the north, and we'll be on the west side of the Sally corridor. down, you see a little bit of a ridge line, a couple of mountains, and then a couple more mountain ranges as it extends out to our 10 o'clock position before the next Salt Flats Basin area. Questions on anything you're seeing so far?
What's the range here to the west of Sally, on the other side of this ridge line?
Like, what's its name?
Yeah, and is it used for specific purposes in the NTTR?
So those are going to separate different range spaces. So if you use the F10 map view, you'll see those name spaces if you have the appropriate grid. Striker 1 flight, we're turning left, 35. So this ridgeline that we're flying over now represents the west side of the Sally corridor space, and it will provide a good, convenient, single ridgeline for us to just kind of fly perpendicular to and pop over the top. You'll see up ahead at 12 o'clock at about 8-10 nautical miles distant, there's kind of a little valley after you pop in from the west heading east, you kind of descend into that. Alright, Striker 1 flight, let's go trail with the 2 nautical mile space.
4.
Striker 1 flight, I'll make a correction. Let's do 1 nautical mile spacing initially, just so we have good visibility on each other. Trail 1 nautical mile spacing between.
3, confirm trail.
3.
2. In.
1 say speed.
Speed is 240. Striker 1 flight, that's 2,000 AGL, so that's going to be 5,500 on your barometric altitude. Alright, Striker 1 flight, I'm on heading 172. Alright, out on the left side of the plane, you'll see that ridge we just flew over, although we're a lot closer to the ground, 2,000 feet off the deck. Certainly looks a lot bigger. We're going to continue to fly on this heading. The ground is going to slope up ahead of us, and we'll just let that slope up come until the radar altimeter activates for us at about, the radar altimeter will activate at 1,500, so we'll be in the 1,400 to 1,500 block, reading off the radar altimeter. Alright, what questions do we have before we start the next phase here? I mean, the first phase was just kind of an orientation and taking a look at things from high altitude. Alright then, the next phase is going to be down low, as I mentioned, not too low, so we're still going to be about 1,400 feet off the ground, but we're going to watch our radar altimeter now while we do some navigation. And we're going to tour this range again, watching that radar altimeter. So we'll fly over it, we'll see that radar altimeter start to jockey up and down as the terrain below us changes, but our altitude in terms of sea level doesn't change very much. So we'll fly along that range, get a second look at it from a lower altitude, see what it's like before we get even closer to the ground and start to hover.
Are we keeping the 240 contract speed to this still?
Affirm 230 to 240. You should have labels that tell you how far you are away from the guys in front.
Oh, yeah, I turned those off. Sorry, I'll turn it back on.
Alright, Striker 1-1's intercepted the radar altimeter, flying 1,500. Alright, so some things to be aware of with the radar altimeter. As you roll the plane, the field of view of the radar altimeter may lose track of the ground and it'll go blank. Some radar altimeters are fixed to point straight down, so as you roll the plane, you aren't getting the altitude anymore, you're getting the slant angle from the bottom of the plane to wherever the radar beam hits the ground. So up ahead at 12 o'clock, you can see some mountain ranges. The terrain should descend on the other side of it, so we'll fly over and get an initial preview of what it looks like to fly over a ridge and not know what's on the other side of it, and then the ground descends away eyeballs on the radar altimeter, and you need to kind of anticipate what's coming ahead. The radar can't see the ground in front of it sloping up, so the human, you, need to provide some additional altitude to account for that sudden rise in the ground. So instruments to watch here is your vertical velocity indicator, which is telling you how your altitude is changing with respect to sea level. That's going to dictate how much thrust you need to add to your plane to maintain speed and distance in our case. And also watching your radar altimeter, which is telling you how far you are away from the ground. All your throttle inputs and controls, your trim are all still relative to the fluid that you're in, the same way it's been the entire time. The new thing here is watching your radar altimeter to make sure you do not hit the ground. As we get close to this peak, you see the tree. Alright, we're up high. I'm about 1,500 feet above the top of these peaks. But as we get over the last one, I'm going to continue to be 1,500 feet above the ground, which means you'll see me descend to match the terrain underneath. Right now we're high, so you'll still maintain visual on me. When we try this again and we're down at 500 feet, you may lose visibility. And we're coming up to a basin, so the ground should be more predictable, and you can find 1,500 again. Alright, before we get to the opposite range here, we're going to turn left to final, heading 350. And as you turn, watch how the radar altimeter reads. Out of the turn and roll onto 350, the ground ahead of you will slope up. You're looking to intercept 1,500 on the radar altimeter. And then use your eyeballs to anticipate the slope so that you've got your aircraft pitched up and climbing as the ground ascends to. and comments on that initial flyby at 1,500 and caging your mind to both a radar altimeter and your barometric altimeter. That vertical velocity indicator is only with respect to your barometric altimeter. You had to use your eyeballs to look ahead and be aware of the terrain in front of you and how it sloped, and you still had to manage your speed as you were following the terrain as it sloped up and sloped down. Any questions on all of that complexity?
Is there any rule about how, like obviously we flew over some undulations that we couldn't have followed, and our actual AGL for a moment went up or down from 1500. Is it just whatever you feel comfortable doing? How closely?
Yeah, A-firm. So right now we're just kind of up high, so we're just letting those undulations happen. Here in a bit, when we get down to 500 feet, you'll start to have to really match what's happening with the terrain underneath you before you balloon away to 1,500 or 2,000 feet AG. And again, that's kind of the dance that you have as an air-to-ground guy, where you want to hug the ground, but if you get too close, you get burned.
Because as you're crossing those ridge lines, they kind of launch you into the air on the other side of the valley.
A-firm, and imagine if you have a radar dish down there, suddenly you've got a clear blue sky behind them, and it's easy to light you up and shoot you down. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that here towards the end of the lesson today. And even worse is you may not know that radar is there because the mountain is masking it from you, in addition to the mountain masking you from it. Alright, we're going to fly along the peak of this ridge line here for a bit and get back up to the north side. We'll do it at 1,500, so just so we can get another taste of this ridge line again to the left and right, but from a much lower altitude, and get a feel for what the ridge line looks like to the west and the east. Because eventually we're going to move out to the east and west and cross this ridge line, traveling west to east or east to west. So just getting some terrain familiarity. And getting a practice of what it looks like to be 1,500 feet above the ground directly underneath you, and the ground to your left and right slopes away drastically. Towards the end of this ridge, we'll be descending to 1,000 feet AGL for the turn back to the center. Okay, last opportunity for questions on the route that we just flew at 1,500 feet AGL, and anticipating all of the terrain that's coming up and learning to fly the plane, which is still being flown with respect to the fluid that you're in, which is barometric pressure, but keeping an eye on our new instrument, the radar altimeter. Alright, so this next round through, we're going to be in the 800 to 1,000 foot AGL block, and you'll see that a lot of that undulation that someone was speaking about a few moments ago starts to come into play now, whereas before it was just numbers flicking by on your radar altimeter. You're going to have to start to maneuver, move that stick a lot more, and be looking ahead, not just at the near rocks, but the far rocks, and anticipating what you're going to be doing. Your mental load goes up compared to what just happened, and what just happened was considerably harder than hardly thinking at all. We were up at 12,000 feet MSC. getting to learn what it feels like to be at certain altitudes from the ground. So you don't have to constantly refer to your radar altimeter. You can use your eyeballs and build some intuition. Are you at 500 feet, 1,000, or 1,500 feet AG? This has implications later in the tactical environment where you may not want to turn on your radar altimeter because it gives you away, or the fact that you're coming. So, to my knowledge, no airplanes in the game have this, but there are some planes under development that do, and so presumably they will model it. But the advent of all-weather day and night attack aircraft like the A6, one of the things that made them all-weather was terrain-conforming radar, or TERCOM radar. So it's evolution of what you have now, which is a downward-looking radar, but it's also looking in front of it and feeding the computer what the terrain looks like in front of it, so the computer can make decisions about pitching up and climbing before the steep mountain in front of you. Right now, your brain has to be the terrain-following radar, and your brain is attached to your sensors, the eyeballs, so you need to be able to see it, which means daytime flying. So the nighttime relieves the human from being able to see that and introduce the radar sensor to feed the computer. Striker 1 flight, we're going to turn left, final course 160.
Striker 2.
3.
4.
And Striker 1 flight, as we come out of this turn, will be at the 800 to 1,000 foot AGL. We're going to be just to the east side of this ridge here, so if you made it too sharp of a turn, just nudge yourself up. Alright, we're going to get close to the ridge line here, a little bit closer than we were last time, in part because we're going to be lower altitude, in part because we really need to build that comfort for you being close to the ground. So being close to the ground is nice, being close to the ground next to ridge lines is some of the best stuff you can do as an air-to-ground guy. You might think being in valleys is the best thing that you can do, maybe, but it severely limits your options on where you can go, which is pretty much straight up. Alright, so from down here, between 800 and 1,000 feet AGL, those mountains look pretty big. You're looking up considerably. You don't know what's on the other side, and that's pretty much the way that the ground forces are. They don't know what's on the other side, and you as an airplane have considerable movement volume where they cannot see. So it's a sword that cuts both ways. Use the advantage when you need the advantage, and you have the ability to control your own altitude. So if it's disadvantageous for you, you have the ability to change altitude and remove the disadvantage against you. In our case, the mountains on the left means we don't have to worry about too many threats from the left, only airborne threats, and that should be given to us by either listening to the air-to-air channel or by listening to...
I may have crashed out.